Nick was a man who liked to think he had life mostly figured out. At 32, he'd built a cozy little world with his wife Megan in their modest suburban home, a place where the Wi-Fi was decent, the neighbors didn't pry, and the coffee machine hadn't betrayed him yet. March 16, 2024, marked their 5th wedding anniversary, and Nick was determined to make it a quiet, perfect evening. Nothing flashy, just the kind of night that said, "Hey, we're still good, right?" He'd spent the morning plotting it all out, a bottle of Megan's favorite Pinot Grigio chilling in the fridge, a grocery run for ingredients to whip up her beloved chicken cacciatore because lasagna was too predictable, and a small, thoughtful gift, a golden bracelet with a tiny gem. The day started fine. Megan breezed out the door with a distracted, "See you later." No mention of the anniversary, but Nick brushed it off. She was probably swamped with work or whatever errand she'd mumbled about. He hummed to himself as he chopped bell peppers, the kitchen filling with the rich smell of simmering tomatoes. By 6 p.m., the table was set, the wine was poured, and the bracelet sat in its box like a nervous kid waiting for prom. Nick even lit a candle, then immediately blew it out because it felt too try-hard. But Megan didn't come home. 6 turned to 7. 7 turned to 8. Nick's texts, "Hey, you on your way?" sat unanswered. His calls went straight to voicemail. He stared at the chicken cacciatore, now congealing into a sad, saucy blob, and tried to laugh it off. "She's probably stuck in traffic," he muttered, poking at a drumstick. "Or abducted by aliens. That'd be a story." By 9 p.m., the unease had settled in like a houseguest who wouldn't leave. Nick paced the living room, phone in hand, refreshing her last message from noon. "Grabbing some stuff. Back later." Back later? Later was now, and she wasn't here. He sat at the table, the food untouched, and scrolled through old anniversary photos. Smiling Megan, goofy Nick, happier times. Maybe she forgot, he reasoned. 5 years is a lot to keep track of. Then, at 9:47 p.m., his phone buzzed. A single text from Megan lit up the screen, cold and sharp as a slap. "I need a break from being your wife." Nick blinked at it, read it again, let out a sound that was half laugh, half choke. "A break? What is this? A sitcom?" He waited for the follow-up, maybe a "just kidding" or "oops, wrong number." But nothing came. The words just sat there, mocking him. He tossed the phone onto the table, where it skidded into the wine bottle with a clink. Frustration bubbled up, hot and messy. But Nick wasn't the yelling type. He was the "let's figure this out" type, even when his brain was screaming, "What the hell does that even mean?" He grabbed the Pinot, skipped the glass, and took a swig straight from the bottle. "To 5 years," he toasted the empty room, voice dripping with sarcasm. "And to breaks. Cheers." The wine didn't fix anything, it just made his head fuzzy, but it was better than staring at the chicken carcass of his marriage. He stumbled to bed, still in his jeans, and flopped onto the mattress. As he drifted off, one thought looped through his mind. Tomorrow, I'm getting answers, or at least a refund on this damn bracelet. Nick woke up at the crack of dawn, his head throbbing from too much Pinot and too little sleep. For a blissful, groggy moment, he tried to convince himself the whole thing was a prank. Megan would burst through the door any second, laughing, "Gotcha!" But the silence of the house slapped him back to reality. No Megan, no follow-up text, just the ghost of last night's chicken cacciatore stinking up the kitchen. He groaned, rubbing his face. "Okay, fine. Not a joke. Now what?" He shuffled to the coffee maker, determined to caffeinate his way out of this mess. As the machine gurgled, Nick's brain churned. Maybe she just needed a night to cool off? A spa day or something? He grabbed his phone and opened their joint banking app, half expecting to see a charge for a mani-pedi. Instead, his jaw dropped. There it was, a $450 transaction from yesterday, booking a room at the swanky Hotel Azure, a boutique place downtown with overpriced cocktails and a rooftop pool. "A break from being my wife, huh?" he muttered. "Looks like a pretty cushy break." Suspicion ignited like a match in dry grass. Nick darted to Megan's social media, scrolling with the intensity of a detective on a deadline. Her accounts were quiet, no posts, no stories, but then he saw it. A tag from her coworker, Lucas. The guy had posted a smug selfie by the Hotel Azure's infinity pool, captioned, "Living my best life." Same hotel, same day. Nick's stomach twisted. Lucas. Tall, charming Lucas with his artisanal beard and stupid V-neck shirts. Coincidence? Nick scoffed. Yeah, and I'm the King of England. He needed proof. Hard evidence. Something to shove in Megan's face when she finally showed up with whatever excuse she'd cooked up. Nick spotted her MacBook on the nightstand, unlocked, thank God for small miracles, and powered it on. His hand shook as he opened iCloud, where Megan's photos auto-uploaded. Most were mundane. A latte, a sunset, her new sneakers. Then, bam, a shot of a neon pink cocktail, Megan's manicured hand wrapped around the glass. In the reflection, a man's wrist, a chunky watch, and the faint outline of the Hotel Azure's logo on a napkin. Gotcha, Nick whispered, though his victory felt hollow. Then he found it, a text file buried in her documents, labeled simply Thoughts, a diary of sorts. Nick hesitated, snooping felt dirty, but curiosity won. He clicked, and Megan's words spilled out like a gut punch. "I crave something new," she'd written. "Nick's great, but it's the same old routine. Dinner, TV, bed. I'm bored out of my mind." His name popped up again, tied to Lucas. Lucas gets it. Life's too short to settle. Nick's throat tightened. But the real kicker came in the final paragraphs. "Nick's a good husband, but the spark's gone. I want to try other people. Maybe an open marriage for the next 3 years. I deserve to feel alive again." Nick sat back, staring at the screen. Other people? Plural? Not just Lucas, but a whole parade of guys? He laughed. A bitter, barking sound that startled the cat napping on the bed. "An open marriage," he said aloud, testing the words. "These years of me sitting here like a chump while she plays Tinder roulette?" The diary painted him as some dependable but dull appliance. A toaster she didn't want to toss but wouldn't plug in anymore. And Lucas was just the start. He closed the laptop, hands trembling. The room spun a little, not from wine this time, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. 5 years of marriage, reduced to a bored woman's fantasy of trading him in like a used car. Nick didn't know whether to scream, cry, or call Lucas and ask for beard grooming tips. Instead, he just sat there, the MacBook's glow fading to black, wondering how the hell his life had turned into this. Nick wasn't a fool. Sure, he'd spent the first hour after reading Megan's diary pacing the house, muttering to himself like a man unhinged. Open marriage? 3 years? Is she auditioning for a reality show? But by sunrise, the shock had hardened into resolve. This wasn't a one-off fling he could forgive with a couple's therapy coupon. This was a calculated, systematic betrayal. A blueprint for a future where he'd be the doormat, while Megan swiped right on half the city. No way. Nick was done being the good guy toaster in her appliance graveyard. It was time to act. First, he got organized. He screenshot every damning piece of evidence. The hotel receipt, Lucas's poolside flex, the cocktail photo, and, most importantly, Megan's digital diary of discontent. He emailed the files to himself, then backed them up on a USB drive he stashed in his sock drawer. Divorce 101, he muttered, channeling every crime show he'd ever binged. Next, he Googled, "best divorce lawyer near me," and booked a consultation with a guy named Carl, whose website promised aggressive representation and featured a photo of him looking like he'd just won a cage match. Carl didn't disappoint. Over a crackly Zoom call, he laid it out. "Stay in the house, Nick. Don't give her leverage. Separate your finances, quietly. We'll hit her with the papers when she least expects it." Nick nodded, scribbling notes like a student cramming for finals. By day 2, he'd opened a new bank account and rerouted his paycheck, untangling his money from their joint mess. It felt sneaky, but Carl's voice echoed in his head. "She's playing chess, Nick. You've got to play too." He stayed in the house, sleeping in the guest room, the bed creaking under the weight of his new reality. Megan's absence stretched on. 2 days, then 3, but Nick didn't call, didn't text. He just waited, plotting, while the chicken cacciatore festered in the trash. When Megan finally waltzed back in on day 4, she acted like she'd just popped out for milk. "Hey, babe," she chirped, dropping her purse on the counter, her hair tousled and her vibe suspiciously chipper. No apology, no explanation, just a breezy smile and a, "What's for dinner?" Nick stared at her, his pulse thudding, but he swallowed the urge to scream. Instead, he flashed a tight grin. "Oh, just chilling. How was your trip?" She shrugged, vague as ever. "Fine. Needed some air. You good?" He nodded, calm as a monk. "Yeah, I'm great." Inside, he was a volcano, lava churning, ready to erupt. But Nick played it cool. He'd learned from Carl, don't tip your hand. Let her think she's got the upper hand. Megan bought it hook, line, and sinker. She prattled on about some work thing, oblivious to the storm brewing, while Nick stirred a pot of pasta like a man plotting a heist. Her casual confidence was almost funny. Did she really think he'd just shrug off her disappearing act? That he hadn't noticed the hotel charge or her diary's ode to trying other people? She strutted around like a queen who'd tamed her kingdom, and Nick let her. It suited him fine. Every day she stayed clueless was another day he tightened the screws on his exit plan. That night, as Megan scrolled her phone in bed, probably texting Lucas or swiping for her next conquest, Nick lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. For Megan, he said his back was hurting and he needed to sleep on a firmer surface. Megan didn't mind and didn't suspect anything. In fact, Nick was disgusted to be in bed with Megan. The divorce papers were being drafted. The evidence was locked and loaded. He didn't need to confront her yet. Time was on his side. "Sleep tight, Megan," he whispered to the dark, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You've got no idea what's coming." A week ticked by, slow and tense, like the build-up to a punchline Nick wasn't sure he'd laugh at. Megan had been floating around the house, dropping hints about space and redefining us, testing the waters with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening, she cornered him in the kitchen, her tone syrupy and rehearsed. "Nick, we should talk," she said, leaning against the counter, twirling a strand of hair like she was auditioning for a rom-com. "I've been thinking, maybe we need some flexibility in our marriage. A little freedom, space to explore." She paused, gauging his reaction, then went for the kill. "Like an open marriage. I'd still be here and you'd still have me, but we'd both get to live a little." Nick stood there, stirring a mug of coffee he didn't even want, letting her words hang in the air. It was such a ridiculous load of garbage he almost laughed. She wanted him to play house husband, cooking dinners, paying bills, keeping the Wi-Fi running, while she gallivanted around with Lucas and whoever else caught her eye. A one-sided deal wrapped in a bow of flexibility. He nodded slowly, keeping his face blank, letting her think she was reeling him in. Megan smirked, clearly pleased with herself, like she'd just pitched the deal of the century. Then, without a word, Nick reached into the drawer behind him, the one where he kept the takeout menus and, now, a manila envelope. He slid it across the counter, the divorce papers landing with a soft thwack right in front of her. Megan's smirk froze, then melted into confusion. "What's this?" she stammered, flipping open the envelope. Her eyes widened as she scanned the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. "Nick, what the hell?" He leaned back against the sink, arms crossed, and watched her unravel. "You wanted flexibility, Megan," he said, voice steady as steel. "Here it is. Full freedom. For both of us." She blinked, mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The smug queen of the castle was gone, replaced by a woman who just realized her throne was a folding chair. She tried to rally. "Wait, hold on, this is crazy, we can work this out, I didn't mean—" But Nick cut her off with a raised hand. "Save it, I've got the hotel receipt, the photos, your little diary about wanting to try other people. It's done." Her face went white, then red, then a splotchy mix of both. She scrambled for excuses. "That was just venting. I wasn't serious." but they fizzled out under Nick's unblinking stare. Panic crept in as the truth hit her. He wasn't begging her to stay. He wasn't even mad. He was prepared. Megan switched tactics, her voice rising. "You can't just spring this on me. I need time. Let's talk about it." Nick shook his head. "Time's up. Sign it or we go to court. I've got enough to make it messy, and trust me, you don't want that." She froze, realizing he wasn't bluffing. For years, she'd banked on Nick being the steady, predictable one, the guy who'd stick around while she chased her freedom. Now that rug was yanked out from under her, and she didn't like the fall. Desperate, she tried to provoke him, jutting her chin out. "Oh yeah? What are you gonna do about it, Nick?" she snapped, her tone dripping with venom. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a low, icy growl that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. "You'll see, Megan." It wasn't a shout, wasn't a threat, just a promise, delivered with such quiet menace that she flinched. For the first time, she looked genuinely uneasy, like she'd poked a bear and forgotten where the exits were. 3 days later, she signed the papers. No tears, no big scene, just a shaky signature scrawled across the dotted line. Nick watched her pack a bag, her bravado long gone, and felt, not triumph exactly, but a strange, bittersweet relief. "Let's keep this clean," he'd warned her that night. "No courtroom circus." She'd nodded, defeated, and that was that. The Queen had abdicated, and Nick was already mentally redecorating the castle. The divorce rolled to its inevitable conclusion like a slow-moving train Nick had long seen coming. By mid-April, the papers were stamped, the ink dry, and the state's laws kicked in. Everything split 50-50, house, savings, the works. Well, almost everything. Nick had been clever, squirreling away a hefty chunk of his personal cash in that new account Carl had urged him to open. It wasn't millions, just enough to cushion his landing, but it stayed off Megan's radar. She noticed, of course. Her eyes narrowed when the final numbers didn't quite add up, but she didn't fight it. Maybe she was too tired, or maybe her head was already elsewhere, chasing the next shiny thing. Nick didn't care. He'd played his cards right, and that was that. Life after the split was a mixed bag for him, quieter, lonelier, but also liberating. Meanwhile, Megan's world started crumbling faster than a stale cookie. Her fling with Lucas, the bearded wonder who'd sparked this whole mess, imploded the second real life crept in. Turns out Lucas wasn't built for commitment. He bailed when Megan hinted at something more serious, leaving her with a half-empty wine glass and a bruised ego. "Shocker," Nick muttered when he heard through the grapevine. "Guy's got the spine of a jellyfish." It got worse for her. Lucas, in a bid to look like some office Casanova, couldn't keep his mouth shut. He bragged to co-workers about bagging Megan, spinning tales over craft beers at happy hour. Word spread like wildfire, juicy, messy, and merciless. By the time it circled back to Megan, her reputation at work was toast. Colleagues who'd once swapped small talk with her now gave her the cold shoulder, whispering behind cubicle walls. That promotion she'd been gunning for vanished. Her boss cited team dynamics, but everyone knew the score. Megan was persona non grata, and Lucas, the idiot, had lit the match. One night, alone in her new, overpriced studio apartment, Megan cracked open her MacBook. The diary file blinked up at her, a digital confessional she couldn't resist. She typed a new entry, her fingers hesitating over the keys. "I messed up," she wrote. "Not the leaving part. Nick was suffocating me with his predictability, but the way I did it. Too fast, too sloppy. I should have eased him into it, kept him on the hook. Now I've got nothing." She leaned back, staring at the screen, a pang of regret twisting in her gut. Not for losing Nick exactly, but for losing the safety net he'd been. She'd wanted freedom and a fallback, and she'd fumbled both. Still, a flicker of optimism sparked as she kept typing. "At least now I can date whoever I want. Fresh start, right?" She forced a smile, imagining swanky dinners and charming strangers. Men who weren't Nick, who didn't know her baggage. It was a thin silver lining, but she clung to it because what else did she have? The apartment was quiet, the city hummed outside, and Megan closed her laptop, wondering if freedom was supposed to feel this empty. Nick woke up one crisp October morning feeling lighter than he had in years. The divorce dust had settled, and the weight of Megan's chaos had finally lifted. No more waiting for someone to notice his efforts. No more tiptoeing around a marriage that had been rotting from the inside. He'd bought a new coffee maker that didn't sound like a dying lawnmower and started running. Nothing crazy, just enough to feel his lungs burn and his mind clear. For the first time in forever, Nick was living for himself, and damn, it felt good. Months slipped by, and he barely thought about Megan anymore. She was a ghost from a past life, a chapter he'd closed without regret. Then, one Saturday, fate tossed them together like a bad sitcom rerun. He'd stopped at a cozy little cafe downtown, black coffee, no fuss, when he spotted her across the room. Megan sat alone at a corner table, hunched over her phone, her face a mix of hope and frustration as she refreshed the screen. Waiting for a text, Nick figured. Probably from some guy who'd ghosted her mid-conversation. Their eyes met for a split second, hers wide with recognition, his calm and unbothered. He gave her a curt nod, the kind you'd toss a stranger on the street, and walked out. Her mess wasn't his to clean up anymore. Nick didn't know the half of it, and he didn't care to. Megan's grand vision of a liberated life, swanning from one dashing man to the next, had crashed and burned spectacularly. She'd pictured herself as the star of her own romantic epic, but reality had other plans. The dating pool wasn't exactly clamoring for her. Most guys swiped past her profile without a second glance, and the few who stuck around turned out to be leeches, looking for a quick fling or a sugar mama, not a partner. Her diary entries grew bleaker. Thought I'd be in demand, but it's like I'm invisible, or worse, a target. She'd wanted freedom, but what she got was a slippery slope, lonely nights, shallow connections, and a nagging sense she'd veered onto a path she didn't belong on. That day in the cafe, as Nick's footsteps faded, Megan stared at her untouched latte, a cold knot tightening in her chest. She'd gambled big, tossed away a steady, decent guy for a fantasy that didn't pan out, and now she was stuck with the fallout. No safety net, no rewind button. Just her, alone, with a phone that wouldn't buzz. Nick, meanwhile, stepped into the autumn air, the sun warm on his face. He didn't gloat, he wasn't the type, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing he'd dodged a bullet and come out stronger. He had a date that night, nothing serious, just drinks with a woman from his running group who laughed at his dumb jokes. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his, and that was more than enough. As he walked away, the cafe door swung shut behind him, sealing Megan's world off for good. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.